Well, hey everybody, Mr. Mack here. Um, I'm not going to do a whole lot of talking in the beginning because we are at the part in the book, if you were with me when the end of chapter 11, when Charlie found the dollar, went to the store, bought a candy bar, wolfed it down, then seeing 9 dimes, 90 cents left, figured it won't be so bad if I just get one more, take the rest of the money back to Mom. So I got one more Wonka bar, and when he opened that, he saw the gold glint, and he had gotten the last golden ticket. And everybody just like he was a magnet. Everybody came right into him, and one woman offered him $500, and one guy offered to buy him a bike if they gave him or her the ticket. The shopkeeper protected him, went up to him and said, "Charlie, hold on to that ticket with all your might and run home as fast as you can." And that's where we are. So we know how the family's going to react, because they've all been hoping. They've all been hoping for Charlie, as much as Charlie's been hoping for the golden ticket. So chapter 12 is called "What It Said on the Golden Ticket." Charlie burst through the front door, shouting, "Mother! Mother! Mother!" Mrs. Bucket was in the old grandparents' room serving them their evening soup. "Mother!" yelled Charlie, rushing into them like a hurricane. "Look what I've got! Look, I've got it! Look, Mother, look! The last golden ticket, it's mine! I found some money in the street and I bought 2 candy bars and the second one had it. The golden ticket. And there were crowds of people all around me wanting it, and the shopkeeper rescued me. And I ran all the way home, and here I am. It's the 5th golden ticket, Mother. I found it!" Mrs. Bucket simply stood and stared while the 4 old grandparents, who were sitting up in the bed, balancing bowls of soup on their laps, all dropped their spoons, ka-toink, clatter, and froze against their pillows. For about 10 seconds, there was absolute silence in the room. Nobody dared speak or move. It was a magic moment. Then, very softly, Grandpa Joe said, "You're pulling our legs, Charlie, aren't you? You're just having a little joke, aren't you?" I'm not," cried Charlie, rushing up to the bed and holding out the large and beautiful golden ticket for him to see. Grandpa Joe leaned forward and took a close look, his nose almost touching the ticket. The others watched him, waiting for the verdict. Then, very slowly, with a slow and marvelous grin spreading all over his face, Grandpa Joe lifted his head and looked straight at Charlie. The color was rushing to his cheeks. His eyes were wide open, shining with joy, and in the center of each eye, right in the very center, in the black pupil, a little spark of wild excitement was slowly dancing. The old man took a deep breath. And suddenly, with no warning whatsoever, an explosion seemed to take place within him. He threw up his arms and yelled, "Yippee!" And at the same time, his long, bony body rose up out of bed, and his bowl of soup went flying on into the face of Grandma Josephine. And in one fantastic leap, this old fellow, a 96 and a half, who hadn't been out of bed these last 20 years, jumped on the floor and started doing a dance of victory in his pajamas. "Yippee!" he shouted. "3 cheers for Charlie! Ship, hip, 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 hooray!" At this point, the door opened and Mr. Bucket walked into the room. He was cold and tired, and he looked it. All day long he had been shoveling snow in the streets. "Cripes!" he cried. "What's going on in here?" Didn't take him long to figure it out, because all of them told him what had happened. "I don't believe it," he said. "It's not possible. Show him the ticket, Charlie," shouted Grandpa Joe, who was still dancing around the floor like a dervish in his striped pajamas. "Show your father the 5th and last golden ticket in the world." "Let me see it, Charlie," Mr. Bucket said, collapsing into a chair and holding out his hand. Charlie came forward with the precious document. It was a very beautiful thing, this golden ticket having been made, so it seemed, from a sheet of pure gold hammered out almost into the thinness of paper. On one side of it was printed by some clever method in jet black letters was the invitation itself from none other than Mr. Wonka. "Read it aloud," said Grandpa Joe, climbing back into bed again at last. "Let's all hear exactly what it says." Mr. Bucket held the lovely golden ticket up close to his eyes. His hands were trembling slightly, and he seemed to be overcome by the whole business. He took several deep breaths and then cleared his throat. He said, "All right, I'll read it. Here we go. Greetings to you, the lucky finder of this golden ticket, from Mr. Willy Wonka. I shake you warmly by the hand. Tremendous things are in store for you. Many wonderful surprises await you. For now, I do invite you to come to my factory and be my guest for one whole day, you and all others who are lucky enough to find my golden ticket. I, Willy Wonka, will conduct you around the factory myself, showing you everything that there is to see. And afterwards, when it is time to leave, you will be escorted home by a procession of large trucks. These trucks, I can promise you, will be loaded with enough delicious eatables to last you and your entire household for many years. If at any time thereafter you should run out of supplies, you have only to come back to the factory, show this golden ticket, and I shall be happy to refill your cupboard with whatever you want. In this day you will be able to keep yourself supplied with tasty morsels for the rest of your life. But this is by no means the most exciting thing that will happen on the day of your visit. I'm preparing other surprises that are even more marvelous and more fantastic for you and your beloved golden ticket holders. Mystic and marvelous surprises that will entrance, delight, intrigue, astonish, and perplex you beyond measure. In your wildest dreams, you could not imagine that such things could happen to you. Just wait and see. And now, here are your instructions. Okay. The day I have chosen for this event is the first day in the first month of February. On this day, and on no other, you must come to the factory gates at 10 o'clock sharp in the morning. Don't be late. And you are allowed to bring with you either one or two members of your own family to look after you and to ensure that you don't get into mischief. One more thing. Be certain to have this ticket with you, otherwise you will not be admitted. Signed, Willy Wonka. "The first day of February," cried Mrs. Bucket. "But that's tomorrow. Today's the last day of January. I know it is." "Cripes," said Mr. Bucket. "I think you're right." "Oh, you're just in time," shouted Grandpa Joe. "There's not a moment to lose. You must start making preparations at once. Oh, wash your face, comb your hair, scrub your hands, brush your teeth, blow your nose and cut your nails, polish your shoes, iron your shirt, and for heaven's sake, get all that mud off your pants. You must be ready, my boy. You must get ready for the biggest day of your life." "Now, don't overexcite yourself, Grandpa," Mrs. Bucket said, "and don't fluster poor Charlie. We must all try to keep very calm. Now, the first thing to decide is who is going to go to the factory with Charlie," his mother asked. "I will," Grandpa Joe said. "I will." Leaping out of bed once again, "I'll take him. I'll look after him. You leave it to me." Mrs. Bucket smiled at the old man, and then she turned to her husband and said, "How about you, dear? Don't you think you ought to go?" "Well," Mr. Bucket said, pausing to think about it, "no, I'm not sure that I should." "But you must." "There's no must about it, my dear," Mr. Bucket said gently. Mind you, I'd love to go. It'll be tremendously exciting, but on the other hand, I believe that the person who really deserves to go most of all is Grandpa Joe himself. He seems to know more about it than we do, provided, of course, that he feels well enough to do it. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe, seizing Charlie by the hands and dancing around the room once again. Oh, he certainly seems well enough, Mrs. Bucket said, laughing. Yes, perhaps you're right after all. Perhaps Grandpa Joe should be the one to go with him. I certainly can't go myself and leave the other 3 old people all alone in bed for the whole day. Hallelujah! Yelled Grandpa Joe. Praise the Lord! And at that point there came a loud knock on the front door. Mr. Bucket went to open it, and the next moment swarms of newspapermen and photographers were pouring into the house. They had tracked down the finder of the 5th golden ticket, and now they all wanted to get the full story for the front pages of the morning newspapers. For several hours there was complete pandemonium in the little house. Now you try to figure out what pandemonium is. Let me read that last little bit. Use context clues. Just use what you know and mix it up with what's in the paragraph here. They had tracked down the finder of the 5th golden ticket, and now they all wanted to get the full story for the front pages of the morning newspapers. For several hours there was complete pandemonium in the little house, and it must have been nearly midnight before Mr. Bucket was able to get rid of them so that Charlie could go to bed. So what do you think pandemonium means? All those reporters in that tiny little house, it was complete pandemonium. It was crazy. That's pandemonium. So that was chapter 12. Oh, how exciting. So, we know Charlie's going and Grandpa Joe is escorting him. Chapter 13, the big day arrives. The sun was shining brightly on the morning of the big day, but the ground was still white with snow and the air was very cold. Outside the gates of Wonka's factory, enormous crowds of people had gathered to watch the 5 lucky ticket holders going in. The excitement was tremendous. It was just before 10 o'clock. The crowds were pushing and shouting, and policemen with arms length, were trying to hold them back from the gates. Right beside the gates, in a small group that was carefully shielded from the crowds by the police, stood the 5 famous children together with the grown-ups who had come with them. The tall, bony old figure of Grandpa Joe could be seen standing quietly among them, and beside him, holding tightly onto his hand, was little Charlie Bucket himself. All the children except Charlie had both their mothers and fathers with them, and it was a good thing that they had, otherwise the whole party might have gotten out of hand. They were so eager to get going that their parents were having to hold them back by force to prevent them from climbing over the gates. "Be patient," cried the fathers. "Be still, it's not time yet. It's not 10 o'clock. Behind him, Charlie Bucket could hear the shouts of the people in the crowd as they pushed and fought to get a glimpse of the famous children. "There's Violet Beauregard," he heard someone shouting. "That's her all right. I can remember her face from the newspapers." "And you know what?" somebody else shouted back. "She's still chewing that dreadful old piece of gum she's had in for 3 months. Look at her jaws. They're still working on it." "Who's the big fat boy?" "That's Augustus Gloop." "Ah, so it is." "Enormous, isn't he?" "Fantastic." "Who's the kid with the picture of the Lone Ranger stenciled on his windbreaker?" "Oh, that's Mike TV. He's the television fiend." "He must be crazy. Look at all those crazy pistols he's got hanging all over him." "The one I want to see is Veruca Salt," shouted another voice in the crowd. "She's the girl whose father bought up 500,000 candy bars, then made the workers in his peanut factory unwrap every one of them until they found the golden ticket. He gives her anything she wants, absolutely anything. She only has to start screaming for it, and he gets it. Dreadful, isn't it? Shocking, I call it. Which do you think is her? Which one?" "That over there on the left, the little girl in the silver mink coat." "Which one is Charlie Bucket?" Charlie Bucket? He must be that skinny little shrimp standing beside the old fellow who looks like a skeleton right close to us. Just there. See him? Why hasn't he got a coat on in this cold weather? Don't ask me. Maybe he can't afford to buy one. Jeepers, he must be freezing. Charlie, standing only a few paces away from the speakers, gave Grandpa Joe's hand a squeeze, and the old man looked down at Charlie and smiled. Somewhere in the distance, a church clock began striking 10. Very slowly, with a loud creaking of rusty hinges, the iron gates of the factory began to swing open. The crowd became suddenly silent. The children stopped jumping about. All eyes were fixed upon the gates. "There he is," shouted someone. "That's him." And so it was. That's the end of chapter 13. Well, how exciting. We stopped right before the children go into the factory, but that's all right. We know who the children are. We especially, of course, know Charlie. And all the people in the crowd seeing who they see, describing who they see, and who they've learned about in the newspapers. You know, who Veruca Salt is, who Violet Beauregard is, who Augustus Gloop is, who Mike TV is, and who Charlie Bucket is. And they know each one of them, certainly by the pictures that were in the newspaper, but also by the descriptions of them, or how they acted, how they were said to have acted in newspapers. But anyway, so I'm so excited to finally meet Willy Wonka, and for Willy Wonka to meet the children, and for them to begin their awesome adventure in the factory. So anyway, come back for our next adventure, chapters 14 and 15. Chapter 14, oh, you know what? I didn't show you the artwork. Chapter 14 is Mr. Willy Wonka. Let me show you. This was when Grandpa Joe got out of bed and started dancing with Charlie. Grandpa Joe hasn't been out of bed for 20 years. Jumps out of bed, full of excitement. It's almost like magic. And he begins dancing. He's so excited. And yes, so that's it for the artwork for now. Chapter 14 is Mr. Willy Wonka. Come back. Take care. Stay safe. When you go out, stay masked. Keep your hands away from your eyes, nose, and mouth. And have fun. Be safe. Be creative. Bye-bye.